Hey, North Dakota, Rob Port here from Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics.
And I'm Chad Oban. We want to hear from you. We're giving away $100 to one lucky listener who takes our new listener survey.
It's quick, it's easy, and it'll take you less than 3 minutes to complete.
Just head on over to plaintalksurvey.com by October 20th. Share your thoughts and you'll be entered for a chance to win.
That's plaintalksurvey.com by October 20th. Help us make Plain Talk even better, and you could get free cash.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk, where we're going to start off with a palate cleanser, because I got to tell you, there are times when I look across our civic landscape and I wonder if maybe it was such a bad idea to get rid of the monarchs. That's a depressing way to start it out. A hot take right off the bat. I don't mean it. Obviously, I don't want to go back to monarchy, but there are times when I wonder what the future holds. But we're not going to talk about despair. We're going to talk about how sometimes nice things happen to deserving people. And then after we're done talking about that, Chad and I will plumb the depths of our mutual despair about the body politic. But first, the fun stuff. In North Dakota, actually in 2001, the North Dakota legislature authorized, I don't know if you want to call it a program, but basically a process through which we could give honorary diplomas to veterans who went off to serve their country and to fight in some of the wars we've been in, who did so before they graduated from high school. And I can't imagine what this must mean to them. Now, during the initially it was for World War II veterans. During the 2003 session, this was extended to veterans of the Korean and Vietnam Wars, the latter of special importance to me. I have a Vietnam veteran in my family, my father. And so far, 300 diplomas have been awarded in this program's history. Here to talk with us about that is Joe Kolosky. He's the Director of School Compliance and Opportunity at the Department of Public Instruction. And recently, the reason we're having him on is that they handed out a couple of honorary high school diplomas to a couple of gentlemen who served in the Korean War. And Joe, first of all, thanks for coming on. And second of all, tell us a little bit about this program and also what it's like to stand in front of somebody who's 87 years old, or that was Clayton Birch. He's 87 years old of Ypsilanti, North Dakota. Frank Kraft, 96 years old of Mandan, North Dakota. Stand in front of these people and give them a high school diploma that they didn't get all those years ago. What is that like?
Rob and Chad, first, thank you for letting me on the podcast. I do appreciate it and give me the opportunity to talk about this. And you're 100% right. So much despair out there. The news is just bad news all the time. We got arrests, we have wars, we have, the political cycle, as you know, and it is nice to have some good news. And that's why, for listeners at home, I resent the press release from the honorary diplomas to Rob and asked me to be on the show. So I do appreciate that big time. I tell you what, it feels really good. You don't realize how good it feels until you have that diploma in your hand. I walk down the hallway here and show every member of the team staff here, take a look at this. This is so cool. This veteran gets the diploma. puts a big smile on her face, but it puts a big smile on everybody's face at the department.
So, Joe, first of all, as you know, I'm a big fan of the staff that works up at DPI. I think that you all take a lot of crap up there, and at the end of the day, y'all are coming to work to do right by the kids in North Dakota. So thank you for you and your team for doing this work. Can you talk a little bit about the process of how do people get nominated? How does the department, how do you become aware of these veterans who went off to war before they're able to get their degrees? How does that work?
That's a great question, and I have a great story for that. Like everything else, you don't know what you don't know until it happens. So this first diploma that we issued came in a few years ago, and it went to our HR manager. She said, what do we do with this? I got an application for honorary diploma. So I started digging into the process. So as Rob mentioned earlier, the legislature voted to create a peace century code to enable these vets to get this honorary diploma. So you have to have served in World War II, and sadly, a lot of those guys and gals have passed on. But we still have a lot of Korean veterans and Vietnam veterans that are out there. And it starts with either contacting me, because I now know the program, but then getting in touch with the Veterans Affairs Office. That's the person that will approve this diploma and check to see if they served in an active combat zone or war, the time frame, and if they were honorably discharged. Those are really the two big checks that have to be made to receive this diploma. And we work very closely with the Department of Veterans Affairs and the School District of Residence or the Department of Public Instruction. So people don't know that either. If you went to a school that is still around, because a lot of our little smaller schools have closed down, but if you went to a school that's around, they can issue the diploma as well. So we have had high schools like in Selfridge, Mr. Clayton Birch had the Selfridge diploma, and Wahpeton, McKenzie County issued a diploma, but we also issued a diploma to Mr. Kraft, I believe it was, because his school was closed down.
It's interesting. Do we have any numbers like how, because I guess I think for a lot of people listening to this now, when we think about people, this isn't really something that happens a lot today, that somebody would go off to a war zone before they graduate from high school.
Yep.
But back in the day, do we know how common this was? I mean, obviously you've given out 300 diplomas just in North Dakota, and those are just the people who applied for it. It's almost an unimaginable thing to think of how young you have to be to not have obtained a high school diploma, and now you got a rifle and you're in a war zone and you're fighting for your country. That's unbelievable.
And that is interesting. I wanted to comment on the stories. So Mr. Birch and Mr. Kraft, the two diplomas we gave out recently, they were, I would say, quote unquote, the old school veterans, because they grew up on the farm. 8th grade, guess what? You can't go to school anymore because I need you on this farm. One of the gentleman's dads got pneumonia. So really, it was life or death, literally, for that young man to serve on that family farm to keep the income going, the dollars coming into the family. But then you have the, I'll say, quote unquote, new school folks that were the Vietnam veterans who were drafted either in high school. One of the gentlemen's named Marv King. He had one course left, and it was a chemistry class, and he was drafted into the Vietnam War, went over, served his 4 years, came back, had a wonderful career, worked for the Veterans Affairs Office for his entire life. And interesting story. So he was receiving cards in the mail for graduations in 2023. And he looked at those cards and he said, you know what? I really would like to have graduated high school myself. His wife heard it, and his wife got on the horn, started doing some research on honorary diplomas, got a hold of me. That's where that original story came with the HR manager here at DPI, got the application. And I was like, wow, cool. And he was such a character. When he received that diploma, he was over the moon. He drove here from Washington to thank us personally. So I got pictures in my office here with this gentleman that just took him on a tour, met Superintendent Baszler. As you know, Superintendent Baszler's father was a Korean War veteran, so this project is close to her heart as well. But the big takeaway is every single one of these veterans say the same thing. I didn't realize how happy or how much this means to me until I received this diploma. which is a cool story. And it's a feel-good story, and I had to share it with you guys, and hopefully your listeners enjoy the story as well.
Joe, I mean, that is just some incredibly powerful stuff. I mean, you think about the 17 and 18-year-olds that we all know right now and thinking about them going overseas and fighting for this country. It is, it's really jarring. I think you have a child who's about that age, don't you, Joe?
I have a 16-year-old. He can barely get out the door in the morning, and we're sending these guys over to Vietnam, to Korea. In another interesting point, Chad, is you're 100% right. Every one of the veterans, they did not reach out. They didn't want the fanfare, because that generation was a different generation. I had to do my work, get it done, and come back home and provide for my family. Another fun story. So personal, close to my heart. 4 years ago, my brother sends me a picture, and it's a strapping lad, the rifle on his shoulder, and it says Walter William Kolosky, which is my last name, World War II veteran. So I text my brother back, and I'm from West Virginia, so he's back home. I text him back. I said, "Who's this guy? Is it the uncle?" He goes, "No, that's our grandfather." I called him my grandma. I said, "You're telling me Grandpa Kolosky was in World War II, and nobody told me through my entire... I'm 42 years old, and no one's told me my grandfather served in World War II." He said, "I don't want anyone to know about it. I want to serve my country, come back home, and provide for my family." So that's what kind of generation that those fellows were.
You know, my grandfather, I started doing some genealogy, and even my father didn't really know about his dad, because my grandfather served in World War II, and going through it and finding his military records, we actually found out my grandfather owned a fishing boat out of Valdez, Alaska, and he called it the Sea Dog. And we didn't know that he had named his fishing boat after the submarine that he had served on in the Pacific Theater. We had no idea. And that's where he learned. He was a mechanic. That's where he learned to be a diesel mechanic. He was a fireman on the Navy still called them firemen, even though he was working on the diesel engine on the submarine. It was amazing. And even my father, I'm looking at a picture of my father on my wall right now. He's standing there. He's got a silver star pinned to his chest. I have it in a shadow box with his 4 bronze stars and his 3 purple stars. And he's standing there, and he got it pinned on his chest by George S. Patton IV, who was his commander of the 11th Armored Cavalry in Vietnam. And in that picture, he's 19 years old, and had gone, and he graduated from high school, but he didn't. He went to the University of Alaska Fairbanks for about a year. And ports are not really classroom people. We're the kid in the back who can't sit still. That's our profile. He didn't do so good. He got in on a baseball scholarship. But then he spent maybe a little bit too much time playing pool and drinking beer and ended up in Vietnam. And it was like would go on. He was the lead investigator for the state of Alaska on the Exxon Valdez oil spill. He interviewed Joe Hazelwood. He put a serial killer in jail. But through all of this illustrious career in law enforcement, he started his own business here in North Dakota as a private investigation business, was very successful, didn't have a college diploma. And I know a program like this isn't available for that, and that is what it is. But I guess what I'm thinking, what that would mean to my father, I feel like there's a part of him that always feels like he missed out, like he didn't achieve something, which he shouldn't. He shouldn't feel that way. Yep. But I know he does. And I guess that's what makes me think about the people in this program is how, like, it feels nice for us to do something nice for veterans who serve their country this way. But the most important thing is what it does for them. You know, to make it feel like there's a part of their life, they close the circle on a part of their life. And that's a good thing.
Well, the smiles on their faces are more than words can represent. You know when someone's genuinely happy. So we have pictures of these gentlemen, and like I said, when Marv came to office, he's just glowing, so proud of this. What I also love about this program is the stories. Like Rob, you talked about your was it your father or your grandfather? You just said
my father Vietnam, my grandfather World War II. Okay,
so Mr. Birch has a story where he went to the Navy, and the funny thing about the Navy is you work with a lot of water. Mm-hmm. He didn't know how to swim, so he was quote unquote taught how to swim by being thrown into Lake Michigan. So can you imagine being 17 years old and you can't swim, and you're on a boat in the middle of Lake Michigan, and they toss you in and say, "Go for it, kid." you float, you floaters are sick. I mean, what do you do? Another one was Mr. Kraft. He was the 96-year-old veteran, and he worked on tanks, patent tanks in Korea, 3 miles behind the enemy lines. So he's pretty close to the fighting. So he took his helmet off and he put it on top of the tank, and he was working on this tank for 15, 20 minutes. He stands up, looks at his helmet, and there's a bullet hole in it. So could you imagine placing yourself in that scenario where you are just fine as fine could be, and you're doing your job, and you stand up and you said, this could have been me, your number, but now he is in Mandan, North Dakota. He got his diploma. So it's cool making the connections with me, our staff here, and what these guys went through, and learning about their story. And Mr. Marv King, he worked on 5 aircraft carriers. Can you imagine working on 5 aircraft carriers in Vietnam? He was a Chinese linguist, and he picked up messages from the Chinese and decoded them for the war effort. It just, the stories, I just go on and on with these stories. It's so cool.
So it's interesting when you talked about folks going off to war and then they don't talk about it. So my father was a Vietnam veteran, and the only time I remember him really talking about it is when he ran into other Vietnam veterans, and there was this kinship and this sort of brotherhood that instantly would come out. Before my dad died in 1998, my brother Sean, who Joe, did a college project where he interviewed my dad about his time served in Vietnam. And my dad was a politician, so he was very used to being in front of the camera or whatever, watching those videos. And it was probably a year or two before he passed away. He was so uncomfortable talking about Vietnam. Like, it was such a life-changing experience that he was just so uncomfortable. So it is so wonderful that these folks are getting recognized for the time that they've served. But one of the things that you said earlier is there's not a lot of World War II vets left. The Korean vets that you just referenced there are getting a little long in the tooth.
Yep.
What work is being done to sort of reach out to VFWs or other sort of places to, and I don't want to say the time is running out to get this done on some folks, but even Vietnam vets, I mean, are in their 70s, right? And so is the department being proactive at all to try to sort of ratchet up the pace of these diplomas?
It's funny you mentioned that, because I have my notes here, and on my notes I have the word goal highlighted in yellow highlighter. So I've taken it personally this year. I've reached out to the AMVETS, American Legion. I have an email fixing to go out to the Long-Term Care Association about this program, reaching out to retirement homes, because really a lot of these folks, these guys are in the home, or they could be living on their own, but a lot of them are in retirement homes, and they don't know about this program. And I know folks that I'm very close to that work in long-term facilities. Their hearts are huge, and they would want to give this out to their citizens and their patrons and their folks that live in the home. So we're doing a concerted effort to reach out to all the associations. This podcast helps a lot. I've been on the news. I've been on KFYR, really to get the program out. My goal is to get as many diplomas out as I possibly can. I also want to find those ladies who serve, because we talk about with the wars. Men traditionally have gone to war, but we've got a lot of ladies that went out for the war effort. Those Rosie the Riveters that didn't graduate either. So try to get as many diplomas out to our female citizens and our fellows. We're really reached out.
One of my favorite memes that floats around. It's a picture of B. Arthur and John Wayne. And they say, here's a picture of a Marine Corps veteran and John Wayne.
Yes, exactly.
B. Arthur was a badass. All right. So if you are hearing this and you have somebody in your life, a friend, maybe somebody from a retirement home, from a community group, a member of your family, you should contact the Department of Public Instruction. I'm sure they can give you lots of help and guidance. The process involves, it's not that rigorous. It involves a 1-page application. You also need a copy of the veterans DD 214 documenting their military service. But if you get those things, this is something you can get done. So if it sounds like a good idea to you and you know somebody it might work for, reach out. And it's something really special that can happen. Joe, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. It's a wonderful program. At 300, almost 300 given out so far in the program's history. That's great. Let's give out 300 more. That'd be fantastic.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks for having me on, guys. I really appreciate it.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
Welcome back. I got to say, people who are familiar with my career probably don't typically come to me for that kind of a story, but they are important. I guess there's the old saws about journalism where if it bleeds, it leads, and safe airplane landings don't make news and all that. But sometimes we do need to talk about it. There are good things happening. There's a lot of dedicated, caring people who do work in government, who work in elected office, and who work in the private sector. Most people are good people. And this is just a good thing. It's a nice thing. And again, however it might make you or I feel about honoring veterans, I know I feel pretty good about this program. I'm glad that this thing exists. I'm really caught up on the idea of the personal satisfaction that has to come with somebody who never got their high school diploma and lived through their life, maybe feeling embarrassed about that or what have you, and getting to close the loop on that. That is amazing.
And those folks aren't wired to ask, right? Joe basically said, these aren't the veterans coming forward and saying, I need my diploma. So the wife who heard her husband make a comment about, boy, I wish I would have graduated, and other folks coming forward. So yeah, good stuff. And you could see when Joe was talking about some of those veterans and the stories that it hit him. This is good stuff. And so the department should be proud of this work.
Really, they really should. It's a fantastic program, and the legislature should be proud of creating it. Everybody involved. Yep. Good work.
Yep.
All right, where do we want to go? FEC reports just came out in federal races. Interesting stuff there. Really strong fundraising from Katrina Christensen. Really strong fundraising from Trig V. Hammer. I don't think it's going to be enough probably to lead them to victory on Election Day. But I think Democrats, and not being patronizing or anything like that, I think Democrats are creating a good foundation to build on in this election cycle. That's what those reports tell me.
Yeah, I agree. I think both Trigby and Katrina have done a good job of not only raising money and building up that fundraising base that we've talked a lot about, but they're all over the state, right? They're building goodwill. They're showing up. Democrats need to show up in places. It is, a tough landscape when you basically are going to have to outperform the top of the ticket and Donald Trump Kamala Harris by probably 25, not 25, but probably 20 points in order to win this thing. So it's difficult, but they're running really, really good campaigns, and campaigns they should be proud of, campaigns that Democrats can get behind, and I think building to the future, right? I think that at some point, some of the stuff that we're seeing around ethics in the Republican Party will swing back a little bit towards Democrats, and Dems have to be prepared for that.
That was something I wrote in my column about Katrina Christensen's fundraising, is that I think one of the biggest news stories in North Dakota over the next 3-4 election cycles is going to be the decline of the NDGOP's dominance. And some of that is, I think, going to be owing to just the natural cyclical nature of politics. They've had a good run, but nothing lasts forever. And some of it is going to be sort of the wearing down of we have a political realignment going on nationally. I don't think North Dakota is going to be immune to that. And also, there's a point at which I think there are some Republicans in North Dakota that have gotten pretty comfortable in power. And like it or not, the reputation that they create is going to redound to a lot of their fellow Republicans. So I feel like that's going to be happening. The next 3-4 years, we're going to be talking about Democrats building back. Now, I don't think 2024 is the year, but I think eventually, probably starting in the legislature, start chipping away at some of these statewide offices and get back to where Democrats have a federal candidate again.
Yeah, I think you want to be competitive. I mean, I think somebody's got to be competitive at the statewide base, at the statewide level, and then pick off the low-hanging fruit in eastern North Dakota in legislative races. Because I think when you start talking about Holmberg, Dr. Rios, all these other things going on, there's new allegations regarding Emily O'Brien up in District 42 and residency in addition to those other things. And often it's the establishment Republicans who seem to be getting a little comfortable and maybe have some lapses here. So I don't know. Part of me just hopes the Republicans clean up their crap a little bit.
It's interesting you talk about getting comfortable too, because I think kind of if there's one thing that unites the divide in the Republican Party between sort of the establishment or the normies and the mega sort of Trumpy, this new wave populist faction, is that neither side seems to be aware of the fact that Republicans can lose elections in North Dakota. And they're both, whether it's the populists sort of indulging their most extreme ideas and extreme types of behavior, or normies sort of just behaving in a way and maybe some of them feathering their own nests or just kind of, it doesn't matter. They've been lowering the standards for themselves, and it's not a good look.
Yeah, and I think that, they just there's sometimes a perception that nothing matters in campaigns, and I think when you look at the national level, sometimes nothing will matter. But speaking of the national campaign, I also think if Donald Trump gets elected president, there's going to be some blowback against Republicans in the state during his presidency as well. I mean, I think it's always easier to be the party who's not in power, to criticize whoever is in power. So we'll see. But again, going back to Katrina and Trigby, I think they've both ran exceptionally competent campaigns that they should be.
Let's drill down a little bit. One odd thing from Hammer's campaign. Now, to be clear, Hammer has crossed the $1 million mark for total dollars raised this election cycle. That is the most of any candidate who's run, or any Democratic candidate who's run for the United States House of Representatives in North Dakota since Earl Pomeroy. Nobody's raised that much. Not even Max Schneider, who ran a pretty good. He's probably the last really good candidate. He raised, I think, in the ballpark of like 750,000, I think, for the whole cycle. Hammer's at 1 million. One sort of odd thing, and this is legal. The FEC changed some rules last year in 2023 to allow this to happen, but Hammer has been paying himself a salary out of his campaign. According to my calculations, he's received it began in the third quarter. He's received a total of $11,484.34 from his campaign, a figure that includes $9,631 in payments as salary, plus an $1,852 payment for a mileage reimbursement. His wife also had a $534 reimbursement for a rental car. But the interesting thing is, I haven't seen that before in North Dakota politics, and it is a relatively new thing, and it is allowed. And I should read the criteria that the FEC allows it. Essentially, there's two conditions that have to be met. First of all, incumbents aren't allowed to do this, and then also the salary cannot exceed 50% of what a member of the United States House of Representatives would receive in salary. That's about $174,000 a year. Trigby's payments would work out over the course of a year to about $46,000. And then the last thing is, if they're making any outside income, their campaign salary has to be reduced by that amount. Now, Hammer was working at the Quentin Burdick Job Corps Center here in Minot. He quit, do full-time for his campaign. He's paying his salary. So a little unusual. It is allowable, but certainly not something you see very often.
Yeah. Frankly, I like the rule change that allows candidates to pay themselves a salary, because, I mean, even just, it is unusual. I'll give you that, but it allows working people to actually run for these offices and non-incumbents to run for these offices. I mean, that if you're Julie Fedorchak, and I'm going to pick on her just because she's running against Trigby, she has the power of being a PSC member, so she's collecting that salary. She can essentially be doing that job, which is campaigning, all over the state. I mean, she obviously can't be like doing fundraising.
Let me defend Julie Fedorchak. There's no evidence at all that she's been skimping on her PSC work.
Well, of course, but it allows you to, that is, just to be clear, I'm not saying that as well. But when you do have a political office already where you sort of have that base of salary you can work from and then also campaign in addition, it makes it a lot easier. Working people have to take time off from work. They have to figure this stuff out. So I like the rule. I think it evens things up a little bit in terms of challengers being able to run. And frankly, how much? $9,000? I mean, that's, a pittance of what he totally...
It works out to $46,000 a year. That ain't much. He's not getting rich.
Trigg ain't getting rich. Trigg ain't getting rich off of this thing. But, it isn't... I do agree it's an interesting thing because we haven't seen this. But I also think it's something that maybe will make it easier for non-traditional folks or either independently wealthy or already in office to run for things.
I will admit to being... I am maybe... Because I completely understand your argument. I'm a little bit more on the fence about it. And I think the reason why is just instinctually, it feels a little gross. Like instinctually, it's like, what? He's paying himself from his campaign? Like, that's not right. But then when you think about it, on the other hand, if we don't allow something like this, then does every candidate who's not already an incumbent have to be Doug Burgum? Or maybe not at that scale of wealth, but independently wealthy? And I don't know. I mean, maybe there's an argument to be made that if you can't, if you haven't been that successful in your private life, maybe you shouldn't be serving in Congress. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's the counter argument. And I'm not saying that necessarily about Trigg, but
I think Congress could use a few less rich people, if we're being honest.
Well, I'm open to that idea. I'm glad. I mean, and again, everything he's done is disclosed. It's completely allowable. He's taking advantage of something that the FEC has made available. So he's playing by the rules. These are the rules of the game, and he's playing by them.
Rob, let me, historically, Kevin Cramer's campaign manager has been a spouse. And so I assume many couples have joint checking accounts. The money is going into the household, right?
Right.
I mean, if Kevin Cramer's paying his wife to be his campaign manager, is that much different than what we're talking about here?
That's a fair point. And I've defended that practice. And let's be honest, Chris Kramer there have been media stories about family members getting staff positions at campaigns, and they're not qualified and they're not doing anything. Chris Kramer first of all, has a communications degree. And when I've booked interviews with Kramer's campaign, I've dealt with Chris Kramer when I scheduled him for the debate. So she's really doing stuff. And also, like Trigg v. Hammer, she's not making a lot of bank. I think her salary works out to like $45,000, $50,000.
So Trigg could have just as easily put his wife on the payroll rather than saying he was getting paid and serve the same function. I appreciate the transparency of what's happening here.
That's a fair point. That's absolutely a fair point. And again,
mind you, I also, if Aaron were ever to run for Congress, I'd want to make sure her spouse could get paid consultant gig through all the money she would raise.
As long as it's disclosed. And there is something, I mean, that's kind of my default. Like, I don't really like a lot of restrictions on how they spend the money. I just want it disclosed. And then the rest of us can decide. And that's part of why I wrote this story about Trigg v. Hammer. It's an unusual practice. It's relatively new. The voters deserve to know about it. I don't know that this says anything all that negative about Trigg v. Hammer.
I think it reestablishes that he's a working class person who can't afford to take 3 months off of work to run for Congress.
Although, if you pay attention to the PSC hearings, Julie Fedorchak hasn't exactly taken time off from the PSC either.
Understood. But we could talk for probably hours about statewide elected officials. They don't punch in and punch out, right?
That's true.
So there conceivably, and again, we're talking about Julie here, but this is all of them. There's nothing that says they have to work more than, there's no minimum amount of hours have to work. So there is a lot more flexibility than if you're working an hourly job in the coal mine.
And it's hard to prove. I have pursued stories about statewide officials who maybe had a really good deputy. But it's hard to tell, like, how often are they in the office? Unless somebody in their office is going to talk, there's no real record that I can ask for Like, even if they keep a calendar or something, how do I know everything's on there? I mean, it's hard to illustrate. I mean, that being said, I can't think of anybody right now, but I mean, it's an open question.
I remember back in the day when Democrats held a bunch of those jobs up in the tower, and there was a candidate who was not running for re-election. And this was before the days of working remotely, and she wasn't in the office all that much. And I just remember those rumors, and this was 20, 30 years ago, and not Heidi Heitkamp. Now I said she, and people are just going to assume, but not Heidi Heidi. But, there were those rumors for both parties. And again, there's no rule. Like, they're not doing anything wrong. There's no rules that says the insurance commissioner, not to pick on John Gottfried, has to clock in and clock out 40 hours.
Yeah. I think John Gottfried probably works very hard.
Probably more than 40 hours.
Probably more than 40 hours.
Tom Beadle. I mean, can I not name him?
Yeah. No, let's make sure Tom Beadle, let's strike his reputation.
Can't complain about Tom Beadle. I'm going to prop up Tom Beadle. Ran into him at dinner last night. He bought a raffle ticket from young Evan Oban for $5 for Wilmore Elementary School. So Tom Beadle, I will not say anything negative about him for at least the next week or so.
Speaking of which, I got some raffle tickets from Edison Elementary here.
How much are they charging?
Supposed to be, the thing is, they give them to the kids to sell. $20 a ticket. Goodness gracious, boy.
What do you live in the rich neighborhood? Wilmore's are $5 a piece.
Yeah, no, I'm a Republican, so I live in the no.
They do get a kick out of like the schools that are like on the north and south side of Bismarck that maybe have more affluent folks. Their raffle tickets are literally more expensive than the ones in the core of town.
It would be interesting to do an analysis of define the correlation between the price of fundraisers and like neighborhood.
Or what your buddy's going for, right?
Yeah,
at Evan's school, they're trying to have bingo night. In other schools, they're buying a new PA system for their outdoor soccer field.
Yeah. Whew. Oh boy, we went way far afield. The other big filing was Katrina Christensen. She didn't just cross the $1 million mark for the cycle. She crossed the $1 million mark for the third quarter. But she spent a lot of money too, and it's. I kind of did just a quick and dirty analysis because in my column about her fundraising, I mentioned the burn rate, and I feel like she's a little bit on a treadmill where she's spending a lot of money to raise a lot of money. And I think that's right. When I looked through her expenses in the third quarter, she raised $1 million. About $308,000 were, and again, some of these are hard to say, like texting. Was that fundraising or was that campaigning? I don't know. But she did spend about $308,000, but she also spent 2/3 on staff and consultant, a lot of money on consultants. So she put up a big number. I perceive her strategy as being, and I perceived this from the beginning, is demonstrating just sort of a liberal donor base, most of which is not in North Dakota. And if you look at her fundraising, only about 100,000 of what she raised out of that $1 million was from North Dakota. So roughly 10%, give or take. And again, these are quick and dirty numbers I did on the spreadsheet right before the show. But I think that she is trying to portray her campaign as being competitive, to tap into money, and to create heat. And she's done that. She has executed that very well. I think the problem is where she's not turning the corner quite yet, is turning that into winning over North Dakota voters. I don't think she's there yet. I think she's going to do pretty well. I think she's got a puncher's chance of getting to 40%. That would be the best vote total for any statewide Democrat since Heidi Heitkamp, really.
Yeah, Rob, I'm not concerned about her burn rate at this point. I mean, it's October 16th. She should be spending all the money. With that being said, I mean, she was on TV before any other candidate for this general election. You told me during the break that Senator Kramer just made a big buy here for the last 2 or 3 weeks as well. So, but, I think that she made the decision to raise as much money as possible, create that donor base for the future for this election. The best way to get somebody to donate to you is to have them donate a first time, because then they'll donate more and more and more. And then she went up on TV super early to try to make the race competitive. There's been these varying degrees of polling, inside. internal, external, all that kind of thing. I'm 100% with you. I think the mark is 40, even 38. If she hits those marks, it is a really exceptionally a well-run campaign. I think she's ran a great campaign, but her strategy was to get up early, try to move some numbers. I don't know if she was that successful, but the only way.
I think if she gets to 40, she's certainly successful. When you look now, granted, the last time she was on the statewide ballot, it was a 3-way race, so a little bit different than a 2-way race now. But if she gets to 38-40%, which I agree, I think we're in agreement, that's probably her ceiling. But if she gets there or near there, that's a significant improvement from last cycle. So she raised significantly more money. She got she will have gotten a significantly larger vote share. That's something to be thinking about, for Democrats. And I know nobody on her team, up to and including the candidate, wants us to be patting her on the head and say, good job taking a strong second place. I get it. They're in the heat of it. They want to win this thing. I don't want to hear this. They don't want to hear this. But it's our job to provide analysis that's outside of that. And I think she's done excellent. I really do. She's run a good campaign. So is Hammer in a lot of ways.
I think that one of the things that after this election is going to drive me crazy, because it drives me crazy after every election cycle, national pundits will talk about how close some race was in a big state because there's only 8 points, but it's 1.5 million votes, right? Katrina Christensen, if she gets to 40%, I guarantee in hard vote numbers will be one of the closest races in the country. Because, people talked about like Heidi getting blown out in 2018. It was, 55-45 or whatever, but hard vote numbers, not even like way closer. You don't have to flip as many votes in North Dakota. Pay attention.
Part of the blowout narrative, though, was that she quadrupled Kevin Cramer's spending and still lost, which is pretty remarkable. But you're right. I think that's interesting. I don't. And by the way, Katrina, I think Cramer's raise in the third quarter was around 450,000, something like that. So she obviously raised significantly more in the third quarter. But at the end of the quarter, going into the final weeks of the campaign, because this report was through September 30th. So going into the final month plus of the campaign, Kevin Cramer was sitting on $2.7 million. Katrina was sitting on $220,000.
Again, it's the incumbency thing, right? If you get to be an incumbent,
he's been raising money for 6 years.
Yeah, you roll out of bed and PAC checks show up in your PO box.
And also, if Kevin Cramer wanted to raise $2 million in the third quarter, he just had to make.
Listen, you only have to look over to Montana to see how much incumbent folks can raise if they're in competitive.
Yeah, and but at the end of the day, it's about winning votes. The person, not who raises the most money. And more often than you think, the person who doesn't raise the most money wins. Kevin Cramer in 2018, I think, is a big example. It can happen. At the end of the day, it's still up to the voters. And I guess that's what I'm basing my analysis on. I don't perceive that Cramer has done enough to alienate enough voters and that Christensen has done enough to win them over. I just don't perceive that as happening. So I think she's done better, 38-40.
She's done everything that she can as a challenger to make that. Sometimes there's just not enough movable voters. A wise man told me after Earl Pomeroy lost in 2010, there's just too damn many Republicans. Sometimes that's the case.
Yeah, I think that's the case in North Dakota right now. But as I mentioned, I do think one of the big stories the next 2 or 3 election cycles is going to be a erosion of that Republican dominance. But we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's see. What else do we have to talk about out there? I don't know, Chad. You got something for us? What do you want to hit?
What else have you been talking about? You've talked about the FEC reports. I don't know. Did you see the Grand Forks Herald story about Emily O'Brien's resident?
I did. That's very interesting. And she's. I haven't done any reporting or inquiry myself on that. I haven't spoken to Representative O'Brien. All I know is what everybody else knows from that news story. But although the news story was very detailed and well done, and when I'm reading that, if I was a voter there, I would be scratching my head a little bit about. I don't. Yeah. It's an unusual situation. She has children with a partner. They don't live together, and I'm making no judgments about their. But her residences that are supposed to be in District 42 don't seem like I'm not sure if those are really where she's been living. And
Right.
I think way back, I had a story way back when about a apartment, a fourplex apartment building in Bismarck that was owned by Senator Kent Conrad. And if you went into this apartment, you could find 2 mailboxes with Byron Dorgan and Kent Conrad written on them. They were supposedly neighbors across the hall. Nobody ever saw them there.
Right.
You talk to the neighbors, nobody saw them. I had that story, and way back in the day, nobody cared about it because they were winning every election, and everybody just.
And there are U.S. senators working in Washington, D.C., so of course, people let them off the hook. I agree.
People let them off the hook, and it was and once upon a time, our good friend Corey Mock, I wrote a story about him where he had legitimately moved out of his district, and that actually resulted in a constitutional amendment about legislators living in their district. And I do think that's important. I think sometimes at the legislative level, when you're talking about like how far is District 18 from District 42, well, not very far, really. But it's important. Like otherwise, what do these jurisdictions matter, right? Then if we're not going to enforce them, then I guess anybody from any part of the state can run for any legislative seat in any part of the state. We can't have that. We don't want that. We have apportionment for a reason. So you have to live in your district. And, I feel like Representative Bryan needs to make this clearer. If she is in fact living in her district, she needs to make that crystal clear.
Yeah. And here's the deal. Emily O'Brien's a good legislator. I think you and I both agree that she's very common sense. But this feels like one of those things that just feels a little too comfortable, right? Yeah. And I think you're right. I think she comes out. She says, this is where I live.
Maybe invite a reporter over for a tour of her house quick. Or just invite them over for a sandwich and a cup of coffee and say, yeah, this is what, you're going to be able to find out real quick if they're living there or not.
Yeah, and I don't like that she, in her statement, it's the Democrats are doing this because they don't like the fact that I've got a boyfriend that I have children with, and they don't believe I can have my own residence. That's not what this is about.
To me, that matters not at all. I have no interest in how Representative O'Brien organizes her personal life. I'm sure she's a great mom. They have a beautiful family from what I've seen from social media. How they organize that is up to them. It doesn't matter. But the law says she has to live in her district, and that's what I'm concerned about. And if she, she needs to prove it. Otherwise, there could be some real issues there.
Right. Yeah. So that's going on. What else have you been writing about, Rob? It feels like you've been writing lots of columns that none are popping into my brain right now.
The District 10 race in Fargo is going to be interesting with Jared Hendricks. That is certainly driven a wedge in Republican parties. There are high-profile Republicans sending ugly texts to one another over some of this stuff, and a lot of it is the Brighter Future Fund, Pat Finken, running some mailers against some Republicans in the Fargo area. Jared Hendricks in District 10, who's a longtime activist. Jim Casper in District. Why am I forgetting? District is it
46?
46. 40. We were just talking about. I kept wanting to say 42, but that's the district we were just talking about. I think that's very interesting what's going on there. I reported those.
Don't you feel really bad for Jim Casper and Jared Hendricks that they're on the receiving end of some of this stuff? I feel so bad for them.
I feel like you're being
so terrible.
I feel like you're being facetious. The thing about it is when I hear people complaining about Republicans campaigning against them is, you live by the sword, you die by the sword.
Yeah, Jared Hendricks and these folks are going after incumbent Republicans all over the state, and then they're complaining because Republicans are going after them. And again, the strategy here, if you're a traditional Republican, if there's one or two more Democrats in the Democrat caucus, that doesn't affect your ability to govern. Not having Jim Casper and Jared Hendricks in your caucus will make it easier for you to govern.
So Jared Hendricks has spent the last several election cycles traveling the state, paid for by I don't know who, somebody, because traveling, being ubiquitous at Republican Party events, even in off election years, the way he is not cheap. All that travel, not cheap. He's a hardworking dude, but he was all over the state actively campaigning against people that he was calling rhinos and everything else. And you know what? He's entitled to his belief. He's entitled to believe that those Republicans shouldn't be in office, just as I'm entitled to believe that Republicans like Jim Casper should no longer be in office. We're all allowed these views. This is the game, and that's got to be one of the things in the mega era that has driven me crazy, is the degree to which they are just constantly victims. I am tired of the whining. They are the whiniest group of people I have ever met in politics, because on one hand, they love getting on Facebook and they love ripping everybody. This person's a rhino and we're going to take it to the establishment and the insiders and the uniparty and all the things that they say. But then you come after them and you try to hold them accountable for being inconsistent or what have you. And suddenly they curl up like turtles in their shells and poor us. Look at what they're doing to us. Stop whining. Stop whining.
You're saying that on the Measure 4, the yes on Measure 4 folks, like big time. The whining about, the no side has too much money and they're being too hard and all that kind of stuff. And it is just sort of whining, and it's a lot.
No,
it is
obviously you're not objective there because you're running that.
I'm not objective, but in what world is raising a lot of money and making your case to the voters somehow unfair?
Well,
that's what campaigns work, Rob.
So when I look at your website and I look at the coalition of organizations that have supported your group, or are supporting your group and have donated, varying levels of money to support your campaign, I look at that and I think nobody put a gun to any of their heads. Nobody forced them. This is a voluntary coalition that came together to make an argument. They think that Measure 4 would be bad for our state at all fronts. And obviously what they're concerned about is going to vary from group to group. The education groups are worried about school funding. The firefighters are worried about fire protection funding. And they're worried about how the decisions behind that money gets made, because this idea that we're going to have Bismarck appropriate this money and tie no strings to it. Do you not understand how government works?
Okay. I took us down Measure 4. Now I want to go back to Jared Hendricks really quick. I will say his fundraising report was pretty damn impressive.
Well, he has the next Rough Rider Hall of Fame recipient in there.
That's what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
So Steve Shields getting this portrait up in the Great Hall from Doug Burgum while giving $1,000 to a guy who spent the last decade trying to kill people like Doug Burgum, not kill, but beat them politically. It's something. It's something.
It's like I said, there is a realignment going on. And it's, it makes me think of at the national level, Donald Trump just gave what I consider to be a train wreck of an interview to Bloomberg in front of a budget, like I think it was the Economics Club in New York. So, I mean, these are capitalists, right? These are serious business people. And the thing about it is Donald Trump was giving idiotic, like he wouldn't answer the questions. Like, do you think Google should be broken up? And he's talking about how mean Google is to him. They don't ever surface the nice stories about him or whatever. And he's not answering the question. And the thing is, like, the most important, interesting part of that interview was the interviewer, who I think was the editor of like Forbes or something like that. He had this expectation that the audience was on his side, and they weren't. They were loving the Trump show. They were laughing along with him and everything. And I guess I'm thinking about that. Like, these are business people. Like, I have always thought that they want stability and predictability and not things that Donald Trump offers. I understand he's going to cut taxes. He's going to deregulate. I mean, he's made it clear and even if, depending on which policy we're talking about, those are even things that I like. But how can you look at that and you're just laughing along at the show? Like, you think this is a good thing. I always thought that sort of the Chamber of Commerce crowd wanted boring politicians and,
that now there's this guy who wants to jack up tariffs. In what world is the Chamber of Commerce? I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't.
Did you see that? Did you see his town hall where he decided just to turn it into a dance party?
For 45 minutes, like he just got tired of taking questions. Like, let's just play some music. And then he, in a very perplexed Governor Kristi Noem, standing on stage for 40, I watched almost the whole, I watched probably 30 minutes of it just because I couldn't believe that he did it. I was like, that didn't happen. So I tracked down the live video. That's exactly what happened. And it was, I think it came in at like 42 minutes. I gave up. There's only so much of Donald Trump's Spotify list.
And Rob, these are the songs I saw. They're not really danceable songs, right?
And
I mean, it was like
one was like Ave Maria.
Yeah.
Which don't get me wrong, is a beautiful song, but not one that I associate with a political rally where you're wanting people to get pumped up.
Rob, you know what I would describe it as? It's a little weird. It's a little weird.
I don't know how else you describe it. I don't. And the thing is if and this is where the hypocrisy comes in, and this is one thing that has driven me from the Trump movement, because if Kamala Harris had done that, or if Tim Walz had done that, they'd be talking about how she's not competent, she's nuts, she's crazy, look at how weird this is, what are you doing? But Donald Trump does it, and it's okay. And that is the fundamental problem I have with American politics. But we got to wrap things up there. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Once again, there was a great program at the beginning of DPI. Just as a reminder, if you have a relative or somebody you think is a good fit for that, contact the Department of Public Instruction. Again, it's a one-page application. You just need the DD-214 from the vet to make it happen. Wonderful, wonderful program. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Send me an email at rport@forumcom.com. That's forumcom with 2 M's.com. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. Chad and I will plumb the depths of our mutual despair